In this journal, I will be exploring the concept of learning and specifically why people learn, trying to answer the question of what causes a person to learn. What led me to this question was taking a class called Animals or Other Animals and Us, taught by Dr. Bayless. And the class itself is fascinating, but what I was particularly fascinated by was Dr. Bayless's approach to grading the class or to evaluating us and our progress in the class. And he does this thing called ungrading, which is to not grade us per assignment or per exam, but instead to put the learning first. And in order to do that, he gives us learning opportunities to take on as the class progresses, and we're able to choose what kind of learning opportunities to take based on what we're fascinated by or what we want to study more about. And as a result of taking opportunities and exchanging feedback, Dr. Bayless can encourage us to further pursue avenues of learning. By doing this, Dr. Bayless sets learning as the goal rather than the grade that you get out of each assignment or at the end of the class, or whether you pass or fail, which how many of us students in universities actually remember that the point of us being here in university is to learn, and it's not to gain a credential or to give us career opportunities? And those are definitely outcomes of university, but what we're doing here in university is actually learning. And I feel like a lot of us aren't taking opportunities to learn as a result of having the priority being the things that we get out of university in terms of credentials and opportunities rather than the learning itself. But that's more of a tangent. And this got me to ask the question of why people learn, because I realized that even though Dr. Bayless was giving me these learning opportunities, I wasn't necessarily taking them. And I asked myself why I wasn't taking them. There are many reasons that could have been for this. For example, that I wasn't used to having this freedom to choose what I learned. Rather, I was used to people telling me what I had to do and telling me what I had to read and giving me a clear-cut path for me to learn in any given class. And having this freedom felt great, except that I wasn't used to it, and as a result, I didn't know where to start. Another reason is because it could have been because I was lazy, or because I was already crammed with so many existing pathways of learning and maybe even learning opportunities that I just didn't want to take anymore. And if I was given the chance, perhaps I would choose not to take more learning opportunities because I was already undergoing a lot of different learning opportunities. But regardless, thinking about this, I came to a small glimpse or like a little bit of an idea of why people decide to learn or not to learn. It is the willingness to take learning opportunities. And that serves as a gateway to ultimately whether a person is on the path of growth or the path of stagnation. Because I think, and I'm pretty certain, that learning is so key to human life that in order for a person to develop, they have to be continuously learning. Because if you're not learning, you're undercutting a lot of areas of development in your life. For example, not just intellectually, but emotionally and spiritually, if you will. But I think in order for us to have this discussion, first, we have to define learning. Dictionary.com has 4 definitions. Number 1, to acquire knowledge of or skill in by study, instruction, or experience. Number 2, to become informed of or acquainted with. Number 3, to memorize, which I don't think that's necessarily fair. Number 4, to gain by experience, exposure, or to example, or the like. So all of these definitions have to do with acquiring. Merriam-Webster has 3 definitions. Number 1, to gain knowledge or understanding or skill in by study, instruction, or experience. Pretty much the same. 2, which is just teach. I think that's an archaic version. And 3 is come to know. As a result of this, I'd like to give my own definition of learning rather than learn, which is the process of acquiring and developing mental resources. Because learning involves taking in information. But what is information, right? What is experience? What is instruction? It's all resources that you can use in the future, resources that you can use to judge or to perceive more about the environment and to solve problems, etc. So, and that's why I would include information into the broader category of mental resources, because they're things that are in our brains or in our minds that we can access in order to better solve the problems of life. So, to answer more of a biological or a concrete answer to why do people learn, I think first it's to survive. Humans enter the world helpless. When we are babies and we're born, we essentially can do nothing except for ask for help. We're relatively helpless at birth compared to other animals, but we also have a larger capacity to learn. We have high neuroplasticity. It's actually up to the people around us, mostly our parents, to help us learn to do the basic things like walking, eating, talking, and eventually everything else that human beings have to do in order to survive and to meet our needs. And just to maintain our physical body, there are actually a lot of skills that we need to learn compared to in other animals. So learning is essential for us, but not only that, we depend on learning opportunities as well in order to survive. And those learning opportunities, a huge part of that is given to us by other people who have learned in the past. However, it gets to the point where learning becomes unnecessary in order to survive, where you no longer have to learn more in order to survive. For example, if you have a stable job, get all your bills paid, then that's like a state of existence that you can remain in for potentially the next 40 years. And in this position, learning is no longer to meet your needs, but learning is still necessary to meet your wants in many cases. So why would a person want to learn? What kind of wants would a person have that would require learning? Some simple examples include to further increase their quality of life, or that can actually be an umbrella for a lot of things that a person might want. To increase your quality of life, whether that means just attaining more pleasure, attaining more security, quality and quantity of pleasure, or because learning itself might be pleasurable to the individual, depending on what they're learning about and how they're learning, right? Either the topic itself is fascinating, or they just have an appetite for novelty. But another category of the desires that might drive a person to learn doesn't even involve the quantity or quality of pleasures in life. Rather, they have goals that they want to accomplish, things that they want to manifest in the world, things that they want to turn from abstract to concrete. But I think these goals that a person might have that are not necessarily attached to pleasures, that gets at the crux of the issue in terms of why people learn. But regardless, all these desires that I talked about that might cause a person to learn, they come down, I think, to one thing, and that is, to sum it up, it's to transcend, to be more than who you currently are, to reach new heights that you can no longer come down from. Because whenever you gain an experience or you gain an ability, can you really go back? Sometimes you can forget, sure. But I think I would argue that is development, which is something that impresses on you and changes who you are for good. And transcendence, this is a theme that we'll continue to come back to. So I was talking to Dr. Bayless about this question of why some people venture out of the path of least resistance, venture out of the path of their conditioning, attain new heights, and transcend, really, while other people are fine and are satisfied with taking the path of least resistance and just take the path that people have given them, or society even has given them, and they're satisfied with their options, and they live a life that's roughly the same and don't venture out of that, which is not necessarily bad, right? But Dr. Bayless introduced to me the theory of the evolution of consciousness, now called the forms of mind, that was developed by Dr. Robert Kegan. Robert Kegan's theory of the orders of consciousness attempts to describe the stages through which a person can pass through in their psychological development. And there are 5 stages where he examines a person's development cognitively, interpersonally, and also intrapersonally. So, like in terms of how you process information, your view of relationships, or how you view relationships, and also how you view your internal world, so to say, yourself. So there are 5 stages, and they are associated with age groups, but of course, everyone is different in terms of their rate of development and what stage they get to at the end of their life, etc. But Robert Kegan sees these as concrete stages that people have to pass through one after the other. The first stage is, he says, it's 2 to 6 years old around, and this is the stage where perception is everything. So the child sees things going on in the world, and the child also imagines things. But there is little difference between perception and reality to the child. And as a result, social perceptions are being made. The child is aware of other people's existence, but not necessarily the distinction between someone else's point of view and your own point of view. And the child tends to act on impulses. This is the stage basically where subject and object are intertwined and interchangeable to the person. And the second order is when categories start to exist, the differentiation between stimuli. However, the cognition is still very concrete. Cognition is focused on things that can be perceived, but now there are differences between things that can be perceived and that are distinguishable and durable, right? The distinctions can be remembered. And that goes towards social perceptions as well, in terms of now the child is aware that there are different points of view, that other people are actors in their own right too. And in terms of intrapersonally, they realize that it's a world of needs and also preferences. The third order is labeled as cross-categorical. So this is when a teenager realizes the interactions between different categories. And this can be seen as abstracting, right? Seen as the connections between things, between people, between different processes, and also socially, in terms of we realize now that we are connected and everyone has their own interests and desires and we can work together. And as a result, intrapersonally, you realize, you learn subjectivity. You learn that you have a subjective point of view of everyone around you, and other people have the same thing. And this is when self-consciousness develops, right? During your teen years, because now you are aware of the interconnectedness of people, of at least individuals. This stage is also labeled as traditionalism because you are aware of yourself as an actor within society and within a group of people, but you're not necessarily aware of the society itself. Like, you're not necessarily aware of what you are acting in and the system that you are embedded in. But then the next stage transcends that. Transcends just being a part of the system to being aware of the system, and that is modernism. This is the stage where you realize that you can actually know things objectively, that you can take a step back and observe your own actions, the people around you, and how your actions are connected with the people around you. But not only that, how all these connections exist in a system that can be observed and explained. And this is further down the abstract road than cross categorical stage, which is stage 3. Because this is stage 4. And this is when you realize that institutions exist which regulate the relationships that we have with other people. And that relationships that we have with other people are actually caused or colored by the nature of the system itself. But as a result of this, as a result of transcending your place in society, your place within that system, and your role within that system, you're able to, what it's called, self-authorship. You're able to author your own life because now you're aware of basically how you're conditioned, and you can choose to go against or go with that, I think. And then the 5th stage is labeled as postmodernism, which goes even further into the abstract than the last stage. Honestly, I don't think I can even explain it, probably because I'm not familiar, or I haven't integrated that stage myself. Because Robert Kegan even says the 4th stage people tend to reach when they're in middle age. So I mean, I'm nowhere near middle age, and definitely not near whatever age the 5th stages should be associated with. But if I were to attempt to explain it, I think it's an even deeper understanding of interconnectedness in terms of the subject being not something in and of itself, but the subject being a result of the relationships between subjects, and how, like, I think coming back to even the 1st stage of how there's very little difference between subject and object. But at the end of the day, I don't think I can explain the 5th stage. So now how does this go back to learning? This is a model of development, right? Stages of development where each stage you realize something, or you take on a new perspective that you hadn't before, and you're able to see the world in a new light. And this is development, but also learning. And I feel that learning and development go hand in hand, even though they are not exactly the same thing in terms of definition. But learning results in development, and development has to come from learning. Like, I don't think they can be separated in a meaningful manner as different phenomena. And I think this system, or this framework of, like, the expanding of your consciousness or the expanding of your perception reflects that. When you realize, for example, in stage 2, that categories exist, that's when you're able to see the world in categories, and that's when you're able to apply this new perspective and this new little piece of crucial information that categories exist. That's when you're able to apply that and learn to apply that in your life and develop that awareness to the point of actually being able to produce concrete results with that. And the same goes for each of these stages. There is a piece of information that you learn that is just so pivotal that not only is it a piece of information, but as a result of it, it changes the way that your mind works for good. And I think learning as transcendence and learning as development between stages, I think this is like the crux of why learning is important in a person's life. The little details that we learn, though we might learn them for specific purposes and goals, I think at the end of the day, everything that we learn comes down to reaching those points of development, reaching those points of transcending to new perspectives and being able to see the world from a new light. And I think really, in a sense, every new piece of information that you learn kind of changes your perspective at least a little bit. But of course, different things that you learn will have different impacts in terms of how big of a shift in perspective it causes. But as I was looking at the orders of consciousness, I stumbled upon another model that's called spiral dynamics, and it has 8 stages rather than 5. And I felt that they were very, very similar. But honestly, I feel like the 5 orders of consciousness are missing 3, because the model of 8 has a particular pattern to it that makes it logical and more complete in my eyes. So on to spiral dynamics. Spiral dynamics, like the orders of consciousness, seeks to pinpoint the stages through which a person develops psychologically. So these are the stages of psychological development. And again, the assumption is that there are stages you have to pass through in sequence, and you cannot skip stages. You have to pass through each stage in order to develop to the next one. And this is more important because for spiral dynamics, because there are 8 stages rather than just 5. And there is a pattern to each to the 8 stages. It shifts from the first one being about the self, then the second one to being about other people, and then the self and other, and that is the alternation that goes on through the 8 stages. And each stage is labeled by a color. I think it's more or less arbitrary what the colors mean in terms of the stages. And the spiral dynamics is represented in a spiral that goes upwards. And I'm not sure why it's a spiral, because there are discrete stages, and between each stage is a transformational dilemma, which is like a problem that you run into in that stage that causes you to seek development into the next stage. On to the first stage, which is beige, and this is the need to survive. This is individual survival, caring about your own survival, being out. You can just picture being out in the wilderness and having to fend for yourself. And this stage is focused on the self. And there's a very simple transformational dilemma that's associated with this stage. And it's that it is a lot easier to survive if we depend on other people. And so we move on to the next stage very early in life, which is purple. And this is when we realize that we are part of a group. This is tribalism. This is also associated with magical thinking, right? Seeing yourself as a unit of a tribe, and kind of seeing the world with a mystical point of view. Like, things cannot be explained, but there are things that we can do that can achieve results. But basically, the goal of this stage becomes sacrificing yourself for the sake of other people's survival, and also, as a result, surviving yourself. However, the transformational dilemma for this stage is that the person is sacrificing themselves for the sake of other people, but actually, you could survive even better if you took advantage of other people. And this is where power comes in with stage 3, which is red. And this is turned back onto the self. And this is where tribalism meets other tribes. You can actually fight to gain what you want. You can hurt other people in order to get the things that you want. You can take advantage of other people, taking things from them by force, rather than just giving, rather than just working for other people. You can make other people work for you. But the problem with this stage is basically danger, right? You're going around causing all this damage to other tribes or other people, and that puts you at risk of being hurt yourself, of other people hurting you or the people closest to you. And that's just not a sustainable way to live. So the next stage, blue, is where civilization pretty much comes in, where values and tradition start to take hold to control people. Or, I mean, from the perspective of the individual, you're not being controlled, but there are just black and white moral rights and wrongs that serve to create society. These collective beliefs that serve to create order so people get along. But as a result, in your mind, it's the in group and it's the out group, right? It's your shared beliefs that are right no matter what. And there's the other who don't necessarily agree with your beliefs, but they're definitely wrong. And it's either they convert and follow your beliefs or they die. You can say that there are countries in the world, governments in the world that are in blue, that have a very, very strict system of laws that are based on values and beliefs that serve to promote order in society. This is the stage where the world can be broken into rigid categories, for example, the in-group and the out-group. And it's an analogy to stage 2 of the orders of consciousness, which is represented by durable categories. But of course, the problem with that is that the world isn't black and white. The world is gray. You cannot indefinitely separate things into categories that work. For example, the outgroup sometimes actually has things that might be useful to you, and they might have beliefs that are potentially more correct than yours, than the beliefs that you've held as a result of being part of your society or culture. So orange is when we come back to the individual and we realize, yeah, you can think for yourself. You can use science and objectivity to benefit you even more than if you were strictly adhering to the beliefs of the society around you. And as a result, society kind of becomes a ladder that you can climb. There is a hierarchy there is a game that you can play within society. And this is where the economy comes in. And this is where discovery comes in. We can discover in order to make life better for yourself in particular. I can get a job. I can learn more. I can play this game that is making money in order to make my life better. And really, the purpose of orange is to gain material possessions, to increase your own quality of life, and to climb the ranks within society. And it might come quick to you that the United States of America is in this stage of orange in its development. And the system is designed so that people play the game because economic growth is valued. The ability to start your own business and the freedom to make that work is valued in this country. And a lot of the industrialized world is in orange. But the problem is material possessions isn't going to make you happy. And selfishness, just gaining things for yourself, isn't necessarily going to bring you the utmost fulfillment. And not only that, it's actually destroying our future. It's destroying the planet, which puts our entire human race at risk with climate change and environmental problems like pollution, but also just the oppression of the lower classes and people who are not as advantaged as you are within the country and also in the world stage, right? The problem is that gaining things for yourself is at the expense of other people losing things and other people getting the short end of the stick. So the next stage comes back to focus on the other. And this is where empathy comes in. This is where we try to solve world problems. And the recognition that humans and non-humans are oppressed. And this is where our awareness of concern kind of becomes global. Basically, spirituality. That's when spirituality, or at least a shallow version of spirituality, comes to play. The recognition that we are all connected and you can make the world a better place. You don't have to just fend for yourself. You don't have to just play the game of society to increase your own quality of life, but you can do so to increase the quality of life of other people and non-human animals as well. However, the problem with this stage is that it doesn't effectively engage with solutions. And this is where the next stage, yellow, comes in. And it's the recognition of systemic thinking. It's being able to pretty much detach yourself from society and to see the world in consequences and the result of systems rather than just like individual actors. And this is very akin to modernism, stage 4, which is where self-authorship comes into the picture. And basically, yellow is where a person starts to explore mental models, like, for example, spiral dynamics and the orders of consciousness. This is a development at the level of yellow, which is seeing the systems that are behind why everything happens. And this is also where the valuing of knowledge comes in. Yellow is said to be very rare and very difficult to get to, just like modernism or self-authorship is very difficult to get to. However, there's still a next stage, which is turquoise. And the problem with turquoise is that most of us, like, let alone me, we haven't gotten there yet. And if yellow was was coming back to the individual, then turquoise would be the collective, the stage that succeeds your ability to think systemically and to see the world's problems as results of a system. And I would imagine that it comes down to being able to apply that knowledge collectively, but I don't know how that would be different from green, but I don't know exactly how that would manifest. I imagine this is like probably, you can see this as true spirituality, true interconnectedness in some way, but I wouldn't be able to put a finger on it. An interesting thing to note about spiral dynamics is that just like the orders of consciousness, which has the cognitive, the interpersonal, and the intrapersonal, spiral dynamics has different pathways of development. You can be at different stages of development in different areas of your life. For example, like your cognition, but also your relationships, emotionally, and also spiritually, and apparently in terms of sexuality. I'm not sure how that works, but basically there are different parts of you that can develop at different rates, and that would explain more of the nuances of psychological development. For example, I think that explains why a person can be very, very smart and be able to think systemically, but still be very immoral, like still have the tendency to use that knowledge for their own purposes and for their own increasing their own personal power or their own quality of life rather than collectively. So I think the part of spiral dynamics that goes back to our theme of development and of transcendence is that once you transcend to the next level, you can't go back. Going back to our original definition of learning, you've acquired mental resources that you cannot let go of because it's shifted your entire perspective of life itself. It gives you a perspective that through which now you can see yourself from the outside if you compare it to before that new mental resource. It's like a perspective that you can't unsee. And so these models, these models of psychological development, I think they show where a person can go if they have the desire. Or you can say that they show how a person can grow if they have the desire. So I think through this exploration of these models, it comes down to this conclusion that why a person learns is to grow, basically, to be more than what they were previously, to reach new heights of awareness. I don't think you can truly learn without growing. And coming back to this definition of mental resources, I think spiral dynamics kind of allows us to differentiate different types of mental resources. Transcending into orange, for example, learning that there are games that you can play, that you can win in within society, that society has a ladder that you can climb, right? That's like a piece of information, or in this case, I'm calling it a mental resource that shifts your entire view of life. But then seeing that shift is not enough for you to be able to produce results based on that, right? You have to have supporting mental resources that build off of that new perspective. For example, knowledge about money, knowledge about the job that you're taking on in order to earn money, networking, and just how to strategically climb the ranks, etc. So there are pivotal mental resources and there are supporting mental resources, which I guess it's an idea in itself that we can explore. So in order to conclude this exploration, I'd like to first state the conclusion we've come to, which is why we learn. I think we learn to transcend, to be more than who we were previously. However, what makes a person want to transcend? The problem with desires is that you can have a lot of people who are exposed to roughly the same opportunities, and they're going to want different things. Some of them are going to settle with security. Some of them are going to want to be an artist. Some of them are going to want to earn a lot of money. And who knows where that desire comes from? I think that leads us to an unsatisfying conclusion that we kind of don't really know why people want anything. It could be because of predispositions, genetic or otherwise, that causes a person to lead a certain life path. It could be circumstances like pivotal moments, being exposed to an opportunity or knowledge at the right place and at the right time. And maybe that is what's required to even activate certain predispositions. But of course, we know that life is complicated and it's probably a mix of many, many, many different factors. And that leads me to reflect about why I learn. Why did I take certain learning opportunities and not others that Dr. Bayless presented to me in his class? At the end of the day, it comes down to fascination. There are many topics that I am fascinated about. There are many topics that I'm not fascinated about. But some topics, for example, like psychology, are directly applicable. And I can say that I like to learn about them because they're useful. But that's not entirely true because there are other topics that are just as useful, if not even more useful, like finance and just how to make money that I'm just not remotely interested in. But that could very well increase my quality of life as well. And so I think the best answer for why I choose to take learning opportunities is fascination. But what leads me to be fascinated by a certain topic? Honestly, it's probably to do with a predisposition or maybe even unconscious ways that my past has impacted me unconsciously, events in my past that I'm not aware about. But it's really, really hard to say. But just reflecting on my own experience kind of reinforces the conclusion that we don't know where our desires come from. And that's where I'll end this reflection.